Now, sometimes there are teams that, based off of situations, no matter what is out there in terms of the coaching market, it's time for a coaching change. And I think with the Los Angeles Chargers, geez, it sounds terrible to even say, with their rip-off Dodgers logo, they were in a position after 4 years of Mike McCoy that they really did need to move on ultimately. I mean, it started off well, and the past couple seasons really didn't go according to plan. And this team was not really trending in an upward direction or in a direction where you could really feel in a tough competitive division like the AFC West that the Chargers in any way, shape, or form were legitimate contenders. So the San Diego Chargers become the LA Chargers. They fire Mike McCoy and they go out into the coaching market. Now, to be fair, sometimes when we talk about these head coaching hires, it's all a crapshoot because as I've referenced in other videos, while I don't think that this year's head coaching market was particularly great, there weren't a lot of hot coordinators. That doesn't necessarily mean that there were bad options or good options, because sometimes you could have hot coordinators that make crappy head coaches, and sometimes you have mediocre to less than stellar coordinators that can become good, solid head coaches. And it can be hard. It's about fit. It's about so many different things that are even outside of the head coach's control. So we can sit there and have our opinions on it, but at the end of the day, only time will tell. And frankly, if a head coach has a good general manager, a good front office, and a team is able to identify the right talent for the right system on offense and defense, that coach is going to look really, really good. And if not, they're going to beat the Cleveland Browns. It's just that simple. So the Los Angeles Chargers, with their rip-off LA Dodgers logo, trying to insist on going into a market where they're going to be maybe the eighth show in town, as I was reminded because you have USC there too. How dare I forget? Decided that the best way to get the new fan base and their old fan base to stick with them was Anthony Lynn. Now, when you look at Anthony Lynn, here's a guy, 48 years old, I believe he is, spent 7 years in the league as a player, won 2 Super Bowl championships as a special teamer on the Broncos teams of Elway and Terrell Davis under Mike Shanahan in the late 90s. While not a star player, oftentimes the best coaches in the league aren't star players, and frankly, some cases aren't NFL players at all. You look at a guy like Bill Belichick. I mean, he wasn't a star NFL player. Bill Parcells wasn't a star NFL player. Bill Cowher wasn't a star NFL player. I mean, so it's nice, though, when you can have a guy who did have some experience playing in the league, because you would think naturally it would allow him to relate to the players and he would better understand what goes on the field, because he can get both the X's and O's perspective of being a coach and the Jimmy's and Joe's perspective of having been in that position before. Over the past decade, almost decade and a half, he's been primarily a running back coach throughout the league in several stops, including stops under Mike Shanahan and Bill Parcells. So he's been in some good situations, been around some decent head coaches. The last couple of years, he was under Rex Ryan, and after the 0-2 start, when they fired their offensive coordinator, Anthony Lynn was finally given the keys to be the play caller for the first time in his NFL career. The results were kind of mixed. So I found it kind of interesting that he was such a hot name on the coaching scene with less than 1 year of experience as a coordinator, and frankly not a lot to hang his hat on. But at the end of the day, he got the gig. He is the next head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, in terms of the positives he could potentially bring to the table, here's an offensive-minded guy, similar to Mike McCoy, but his expertise more so, as opposed to Mike McCoy with quarterbacks in the passing game, is in ground and pound style football, the running game. And when you look at the success that the Bills had running the football with him as the running backs coach and then later on as the offensive coordinator, this is a guy that does know the running game. And when you look at the tail end of Philip Rivers' career, you want to be able to protect Philip Rivers, potentially save Philip Rivers from some of the abuse he takes behind that suspect offensive line in the pass protection, and potentially extend the peak career of Philip Rivers. And one way to do that is to get a better return on your investment from your 2015 first-round pick, Melvin Gordon, who showed some flashes in 2016. A much different story with Melvin Gordon in 2016 than the Melvin Gordon we saw as a rookie in 2015. Melvin Gordon, at least in 2016, looked like a capable, somewhat reliable NFL starting running back. Now you put him into a situation in an Anthony Lynn system, He could be looking at having a 1,300-yard type of season, being among the league leaders in rushing, and that could really open up things for Philip Rivers in the passing game, and more importantly, just protect Philip Rivers. Also helping the defense by keeping the defense off of the field. So there are definitely positives there, especially when you look at the staff. They're going to keep continuity there with Ken Wisenhunt being retained as the offensive coordinator. There's a lot of talk that Gus Bradley is ultimately going to be hired to be the defensive coordinator, which may very well necessitate a necessary change to the 4-3, which this team needs to undergo, especially if Bosa is going to be that defensive franchise piece. A lot of the times the looks that they ran where Bosa looked the best was when he had his hand on the ground and he was a 4-3 end. As a result, that's the system that they need to run full-time going forward. So when you look at that, Wisenhunt as his offensive coordinator, keeping the offensive system somewhat in place, keeping some continuity there for Philip Rivers, and at the same point in time bringing in somebody like Gus Bradley who could potentially bring a change in defenses, I think could be a very positive thing for the Los Angeles Chargers as they get ready to go play in a soccer stadium the next couple of years. But I do have some concerns about this move. Number one, this is a pretty big jump for a guy that had less than a year of experience as an offensive coordinator. You are bumping him all the way up to being the head coach. He basically went from being an assistant store manager type to a district manager / regional vice president with very little experience actually running his own store, is the way I can kind of equate that where it might make sense for some of you. He's skipping levels. And sometimes when you can skip levels, it can be a dangerous thing. Now, you ask the Baltimore Ravens, John Harbaugh has been very successful for them, and he skipped entirely. He went from being special teams coach to head coach. Back in the 80s with the Bears, Ditka was a special teams coach, got hired by the Bears to be the head coach. So it can work. You always have those concerns about a guy that was in the league so many years as a running backs coach. If he was so good, how come other teams didn't already give him the opportunity to be an offensive coordinator? I think that's a valid question. Now, again, just because people are in the NFL and teams are there in the NFL, that also doesn't mean that they know what the hell they're doing. And we know that to be the case as well. But it does beg that question. Furthermore, when you're talking about you went with an offensive assistant, hired him to be your head coach, you gave him 4 years, it didn't really work. Why go right back down the offensive pike again? Sometimes if you're trying to change things, you want a different type of leadership, a different type of leader. And I don't really know where Anthony Lynn is that much of a different type of leader and bringing that much different style of leadership than a Mike McCoy did. Furthermore, when you're trying to compete in a very competitive LA sports market with several other well-established teams and now a recently reestablished Los Angeles Rams team, is an Anthony Lynn the type of head coach that is really going to excite the Los Angeles market? A market that frankly probably doesn't care much about the Chargers and isn't going to care whether or not they're there or not. If you're trying to appeal to some of those people and you're trying to bring them on board as new fans, is he the guy to really do that? I'm not saying he's not, but is he really? And also knowing, too, that you have a limited amount of time where you're going to have Philip Rivers at the helm. You want to get the most out of those remaining years you possibly can. Is this the best hire possible for a Philip Rivers? Would you have rather brought in another quarterback guru? Or would you rather have brought in somebody that really knew the defensive side of the football and was going to take a lot of pressure off of Philip Rivers by really beefing up the defense to be able to contend with the Denvers and the Kansas Cities and the Oaklands in that division? Again, not saying that focusing on the running game and bringing in somebody that's a bit of a running back guru and a running game guru is a bad thing. It's not necessarily at all. It could potentially be a really good thing because it could protect and save Philip Rivers, limit the pressure on him, and limit the amount of time and ultimately the pressure that's put on the Chargers defense. That could be a really good thing. But will it be? And I guess here's my biggest question for the Chargers organization. Anthony Lynn was in a situation under Rex Ryan in Buffalo. He was a running backs coach, and then once Greg Roman got fired as the offensive coordinator, he took over as the offensive coordinator. The Bills had first crack at him, is my real point. And the Bills jettisoned Rex Ryan. They gave Anthony Lynn a game in charge. If Anthony Lynn was so special and Anthony Lynn was so great, I know the Bills aren't a good organization. They are a dysfunctional mess no matter what the Pagulas say. They're a clusterfuck of dysfunction. They still had first crack at this dude. Now, maybe there are other things behind the scenes at play. Maybe the Chargers offered more money. Maybe the Chargers offered more of this. Maybe the Bills ultimately didn't extend an offer. Maybe the Bills decided to go with a clean slate and in a completely different direction. But at the end of the day, all that BS aside, if Anthony Lynn was truly that good of a candidate and you had him in house, why the hell would you allow him to go somewhere else to be your head coach in the NFL when you had an opening for him to be a head coach at the NFL level? Why would you hire somebody outside of the organization if you thought this guy inside of the organization, who you know, who you're familiar with, easy for me to say, this guy that you know, the devil that you know, is there. And the transition could be smoother, much easier. I don't really get it. I don't understand why the Los Angeles Chargers had such a hard on for Anthony Lynn. Frankly, I don't understand why the Chargers do many of the things that the Chargers do, to be honest, and I'm sure their fans feel the same way. So could this be a situation that it ultimately works out? Perhaps. But I don't see how much of a needle mover this ultimately is with a Raiders, Chiefs, and Broncos triumvirate there in the AFC West that are pretty well established in terms of all three of them being playoff contenders for the next year and maybe the year after that. Where do the Chargers fit in here? And is Anthony Lynn really the type of guy that's going to, like I said, move the needle? And if he was the type of guy that really could move the needle, why the hell wouldn't the Bills have hired him to begin with? Because sometimes the only thing more dangerous than the devil you know is the devil you don't. That's something Chargers fans will have to ask themselves. That's something the Chargers organization should have been asking themselves. I wish Anthony Lynn success in San Diego. And I think initially there could be some good returns and some good success, especially because this is going to be a team that will be able to run the football, the likes of which they haven't been able to do, frankly, since LaDainian Tomlinson was there. And that could have benefits in the passing game for Phillip Rivers and for the defense as well. Will that necessarily result in a huge movement and change in the one-loss record right away? I don't know. It could, but it might not. But again, tail end of Phillip Rivers' career, you're an organization that's trying to, carve a niche in a new market, and Anthony Lynn's the guy you ultimately went with. And Buffalo passed on him. That should tell you something.